Number 10. Gutian. It's a little-known fact that some boats are made of concrete. Doesn't make any sense, right? You'd assume concrete would just sink. But if you handle it the right way, you can make it as good a material as the traditional wood or fiberglass. Crazy! One striking example of a concrete vessel is the Gutian ship, which used to be sitting on a riverbank at Fuzhou, capital of Fujian province in southeast China. The Gutian, at the time the biggest concrete ship on the planet at 3,000 tons, spent 4 decades at this location. And you've guessed it, the craft was abandoned. Instead of shipmates, the vessel welcomed tourists. It wasn't unheard of for homeless people to sleep on board as well. In 2013, the Gutian's time at Fuzhou finally ended. But what do you do with a long-abandoned concrete boat? Do you tow it away? Nah, you smash it to pieces and reduce it to rubble. It was being demolished so apartments could be built in its place. Ah, progress, don't you just love it? Speaking of which, the Gutian didn't actually make much progress during its time in service. The 1970s saw China's communist government turn to concrete when steel supplies were critically low. It must have looked pretty majestic during its maiden voyage. However, that was the only journey it would ever make. Financially, the Gutian was a bit of a solid gold albatross for the Chinese, who deliberately left it there for years. What a shame that it met such a destructive end. Number 9. SSN Akula class sub. Check out part of an awesome submarine that's sticking out of the ice. Looks like it's been abandoned and the water is simply frozen over the top of it. Those guys standing around for the photo op are Russians, we reckon. And that's where this huge abandoned vehicle appears to hail from. If we're not mistaken, that's an SSN Akula class sub, one of a reported 14 owned by the Russian Navy. The sub was commissioned in the 1980s and 90s, and to give you an idea of what they're capable of, let's explore the later version, Akula 2. They have a surface displacement of 12,770 tons. If that sounds a little technical, well, it is. Displacement is calculated by taking the overall weight of the sub and subtracting the amount of what's known as free floodwater. Akula 2s have a length of 361 feet, 110 meters, and dive to a depth of 1,969 feet, 600 meters. Firepower-wise, they typically pack a maximum of 12 cruise missiles. We hope that isn't a bunch of frozen missiles those guys are standing on. However the sub wound up in this situation, it's an attention-grabbing spectacle, even if it is designed to hide beneath the waves. Number 8. U.S. Space Shuttle Replica. This abandoned vehicle looks super out of context, right? Did a space shuttle crash land on an island in Canada? Doesn't that just sound a teensy bit far-fetched? You'd be right to think so. This isn't a real shuttle at all, but a replica designed for a theme park. The park closed its doors, but the shuttle stayed. The island is situated in the Gulf of St. Lawrence by Nova Scotia. If you think the craft looks familiar, it's because the shuttle is a copy of Columbia, which was caught up in a tragedy back in 2003. 7 people lost their lives when the ship broke apart on coming back to Earth. Prince Edward Island was very lucky to have this awe-inspiring replica on its shores. Not only was it one of only 6 that were produced, it also could be walked through by visitors, unlike its fellow replicas. See that big word adventure splashed along the side of the shuttle? That's obviously a throwback to Great Island Science Adventure Park, which lasted a couple of decades before closing in 2005. Would you like to see this in person? Have you? Let us know in the comments down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 7. Sub Graveyard. We mentioned the Akula class sub earlier. Well, here's another ocean-going treat for you. This time we're talking about a sub and a whole lot more lurking beneath the surface. Sounds intriguing, though as you'll discover it's more dangerous than anything else. Welcome to North Russia and the Kara Sea, where the Soviet administration decided it would be a great idea to drop nuclear waste into the drink. Years later, they're facing a major environmental problem. In addition to a nuclear sub that appears to have been tossed away, there are some nuclear reactors. That's right, reactors. These aren't exactly like Coke cans or empty packets of chips which can be easily discarded. What are the Russians doing about this abandoned vehicle and a deadly payload of nuclear waste? Reports from 2021 state that the government will be talking about the issue at a conference in 2022. The area is the most contaminated of its type on the planet, with high concentrations of radioactive material. A shocking statistic is that all the waste in the Kara Sea combined is over an astonishing 6 times greater than radiation levels at Hiroshima. Let's just pray they manage to get this terrible situation sorted out for marine life and future generations. Number 6. Mystery Boat. So what is this fascinating craft that wound up on the shores of Ireland? It reminds us of a floating garden shed, though it is in fact a houseboat. And it has an interesting story behind it. You see, this little boat had actually been on an incredible journey across 2,000 miles, 3,219 kilometers. It all started out in Canada. Inventor Rick Small built the boat out of wood and powered it with solar panels. The idea was to draw attention to the issue of climate change. He reached Newfoundland with a plan to go around the Arctic to see the melting ice. However, things didn't work out. Motor issues led him to abandon the vessel, though not before he wrote a message and left it inside. The message revealed not only Rick's name, but his intentions that a young homeless person should take the boat and move abroad. Did anyone take him up on his generous offer? Maybe, maybe not. Either way, the craft drifted across the Atlantic and all the way to the Emerald Isle. It took locals 3 years to track down Rick Small, finally getting hold of him in 2019. He's just happy the boat went to a good home, we're sure. But where did it eventually go? The answer is Binghamstown in County Mayo. The boat was restored and is now part of a community sensory garden, according to reports. Sounds like a great resting place for this unusual piece of recent seagoing history. Number 5. Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighter. An incredible relic from World War II was discovered by total accident in the waters of Papua New Guinea. What is it? A plane, obviously. But to give you a little more detail, it's an A6M Zero fighter made by Japanese firm Mitsubishi. It was found when local man William Noyes spotted the 60-year-old vehicle during one of his dives. Reportedly freaked out, he thought he might have come face to face with something otherworldly. Instead, he stumbled upon a slice of 20th century history. But how exactly did it get down there? A natural assumption is that it could have been shot down during the conflict. However, upon examining the evidence, it looks like the plane was abandoned following a fuel shortage. Max and Cecile Benjamin took up the story, tracing the Zero back to a pilot named Tomiharu Honda. He's believed to have landed the craft and made his own way back to Japan. Apart from some stuff growing on it, the wreck is in good condition. Who knows what Tomiharu Honda would have made of his plane being found all those years later. Number 4. Forest of Cars. This next entry is a bonanza of old and rusty vehicles that for some reason or other have been left by former owners in the USA. Pickups, trailers, tractors, and even bulldozers can be found at this intriguing forest location, recently documented on video for petrol heads out there to check out. A wooden house shows that the area was inhabited at some point, and because of the variety of stuff on display, it stands to reason that it wasn't just the one person buying all these vehicles. Part of the fun of this one is its sheer sense of mystery. There's so much to explore and think about. Commentators are keen to point out details such as Chevrolet Corvair and a lot of junk which reflects different time periods. However the vehicles wound up in this forest graveyard, they're providing entertainment for fans of abandoned oddities around the world. Number 3. Bay of Ensenada. Another major location for abandoned vehicles is the Bay of Ensenada at the Baja California Peninsula in Mexico. Various people have left ships to rust away in the Bay Harbor, including 2 Japanese vessels and an old U.S. Navy minesweeper, according to a report from 2007. The most attention-grabbing image, however, is surely this snap of sea lions using an abandoned ship as a sunbed. Talk about cute. Unfortunately, there's a dark side behind this, though. Inevitably, these boats sink, causing a headache for local authorities. Reasons as to why these abandonments happen include financial hardship, especially in the fishing sector. A combination of aging crafts and an inability to make ends meet means the bay welcomes more and more visitors, and naturally some of these visitors sink. The paperwork involved in removing a boat that's causing a problem seems to be very time-consuming and aggravating. Should the boat need to be disposed of, the process can take years. Officials expressed frustration that the abandoned craft were needing so much attention. The more time they spend identifying and removing boats that belong to other people, the less time there is to manage the area, we guess. Still, it makes for a fascinating display of vehicles from different nations, right? Number 2. World War II Motorcycle. This amazing-looking bike is down in the watery depths of the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Dating back to World War II, it's since been covered in whatever the sea can throw at it. Kinda looks like something from the Pirates of the Caribbean, if they had motorcycles and stuff, that is. How did it get down there? Well, the bike is British, and the Brits had a sizable presence in the country during wartime. In fact, they were in charge, pretty much, and using it as a base for major operations. Egypt became the setting for such dramatic conflicts as the 2 battles of El Alamein, so it's certain the bike is a leftover from British forces' time there. The army wasn't exactly well regarded by Egyptians, who were supposed to be living in an independent country. Things flared up, plus Egypt had another deadly situation to come in the shape of the Suez Crisis in the 1950s. Through it all, that motorbike appears to have sat there to rust, picking up barnacles, seaweed, and the occasional seahorse. We don't know how it got there or who abandoned it. However, like many of the vehicles on our list, it's an awesome relic from times gone by. Number 1. Classic Car Graveyard. In 2012, reports came in of a staggering array of classic rides, including a Ford Model T and a Jensen Interceptor. It was like a who's who of the car world located in Staffordshire, England, and all 105 of them were abandoned. Why were they there? They belonged to the former tenant of a mansion who wound up getting evicted after struggling with the rent. On top of that, the absentee automobile enthusiast faced a $150,000 bill to store the impressive lineup of vehicles. It's believed that the renter took a selection of the cars with them when they left. As for the rest, well, what a thing to leave behind. Of course, it was a dream for car lovers, but a problem for the landowner, who gave the former owner an ultimatum. He had the option of putting the vehicles up for auction should his ex-tenant prove unresponsive. Experts valued the range of cars as going into the millions. The aim was for the landowner to get his money back, and in that situation, it sounds like he definitely would have. And if the auction did go ahead, it's reassuring that the vehicles must have gone to a good home, right? When an abandoned vehicle is found, there's usually an interesting story behind it. And even if it's a total mystery with little for investigators to go on, the history of the vehicle is there for all to see. They may have been abandoned by their former owners, but in this age of internet and social media, there's always a way of showing them to the world and finding someone else to give them the tender, loving care they need. Number 10. Forgotten Work Camps. A forgotten Nazi work camp on British soil was recently discovered by archaeologists. They discovered the work camp known as Silt in an overgrown patch of abandoned land on the cliffs of Alderney in the Channel Islands. Over 75 years ago, this camp was a German prison where hundreds of men suffered at the hands of Nazi captors. But when the war ended, the Nazis didn't take the time to dismantle their camp properly. They simply abandoned it, and over years it became overrun by nature. It wasn't until just recently that a British team of archaeologists went to the Channel Islands to locate this lost camp of horror. According to Caroline Sturdy Calls, an archaeologist who specializes in Holocaust sites, the crimes committed by the Nazis at the Silt camp were literally buried. Most people have no idea about the atrocities that took place here, and on British soil no less. It's not common knowledge to know that the Nazis occupied the Channel Islands, the closest they ever got to Britain. Not much of the camp has survived the years. There are only few remnants there today, mostly depressions in the earth from where the barracks once stood. But the team did find an underground tunnel that led from the camp to the commandant's house. There could be bodies buried here, but archaeologists have yet to find them. Number 9. Greek gun emplacements. Not long after the bloody Battle of Crete that took place in 1941, the Germans occupied the largest and most famous Greek island. The Germans took over the western part of the island, while the Italian army had possession of the eastern part. For those who know their history, they'll know that Crete is a major strategic point in the Mediterranean Sea. The Germans were quick to initiate a fortification project to turn the island into their very own fortress. It would help them keep control of the region while assisting them in their campaign in North Africa. The Germans used forced labor to build bunkers, underground ammunition depots, command posts, observation towers, and gun emplacements on the cliffs overlooking the sea. After Germany lost the war, Greece took their island back, and most of these fortifications were either pulled down and destroyed or abandoned. There are still gun emplacements on the island, though, still standing from when the Germans occupied the area. But perhaps creepiest of all are the abandoned sites where gun emplacements used to be. Many of these guns have been removed, leaving empty caves dug into the cliffs where the Nazis had first installed them. Number 8. The Old Mill Ruins. The Battle of Stalingrad was the longest, most brutal, and arguably the most unnecessary battle of all of World War II. It's also considered to be the turning point in the war, in which Hitler overstepped his boundaries, bit off more than he could chew, and ended up decimating his own army. The battle was fought between August 23, 1942 and February 2, 1943. It's been estimated that there were at least 800,000 casualties on the German side, while Soviet forces suffered a whopping 1,100,000 casualties. Plus, approximately 40,000 civilians were killed in the fighting. Make no mistake, this was definitely the worst battle of the war. It was fought between the Germans and the Russians, and when the fighting stopped and the dust cleared, almost no piece of Stalingrad was left remaining. The city was rebuilt after, with the exception of the old mill ruin. The ruin of the old grain mill, originally built in 1903, was left as an iconic landmark. It looks exactly the same today as it did after the Germans bombed it. Number 7. Cold War nuclear dump. When the Soviet Union collapsed back in the 1990s, they had a lot of nuclear fuel that they didn't know what to do with. In the chaos of the disbandment of the Union, a massive amount of nuclear waste ended up being abandoned in the Russian Arctic. According to nuclear specialists, Andreeva Bay in Russia contains the largest reserve of used nuclear fuel anywhere on the entire planet. During the Cold War, nuclear submarines would be refueled while out at sea, with the used nuclear fuel being shipped right back to this bay. It was then put in a special storage facility to be reprocessed. However, in the 1980s, the facility sprung a leak and caused radioactive contamination. So the fuel then had to start being stored in dry storage units. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed, there were at least 22,000 of these nuclear fuel caskets in abandoned facilities along the bay. Many of those facilities are still there today, left in the exact same creepy shape as they were over 30 years ago. Number 6. Negus Island. The Palau Islands in Micronesia fell into the hands of the Japanese during World War II. One of the most heavily occupied islands was the Negus Island. It was first attacked on September 28, 1944 by American forces who wanted to prevent Japanese troops on other islands from being resupplied. The Marines fought a brutal battle to secure the island, winning it only after a single day of bloody combat. Today, the uninhabited island has been reclaimed by banyan trees and coconut groves, but there are still reminders of the terrible fighting that went on here. The island is filled with leftover pieces of combat machinery, from Japanese cannons to rusted U.S. Sherman tanks. There are gun nests overgrown with weeds and exotic plants, concrete bunkers still looking out over the ocean in anticipation of a fight that's never coming. There are even abandoned machine gun nests still standing like silent sentinels to protect the pristine nature of the island. While nobody actually lives on the island, it's become something of a creepy open-air museum spread through the jungle. Would you be brave enough to visit this exotic island and see for yourself the leftover machines of war? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Oradour-sur-Glane. Oradour-sur-Glane is about 14 miles, 22.5 kilometers from the city of Limoges in France. The entire village was decimated during World War II. It was one of the most brutal massacres ever perpetrated by the Germans. This happened on June 10, 1944. A detachment of 200 SS men pushed all 652 inhabitants of the village from their homes and into the square. They then separated the men by barricading them in barns, while the women and children were stuffed into a church. The SS soldiers then barricaded the doors of the barns and the church, while the village was set on fire. Every single structure went up in flames, resulting in all the inhabitants either being burned to death, killed by machine gun fire as the German soldiers shot at them through the walls, or simply asphyxiated by the smoke. Tragically, 245 women, 207 children, and 190 men were slaughtered like animals. When all was said and done, only 10 of the 652 inhabitants managed to crawl away from the fire. After the war, the village of Oradour-sur-Glane was left a ruin. The French wanted the village to act as a memorial to the victims of the slaughter, and so it still remains an abandoned village of blood and horror to this very day. Number 4. Secret Nazi Base. A team of researchers from Russia discovered the remnants of a lost German base from the days of World War II. The base dates back to 1943, over 7 decades. It was originally built as a weather station by the Nazis. It was one of the remotest bases the Nazis ever built, on a small chunk of rock in the Franz Josef Land Islands. This place is located over 680 miles from the city of Arkhangelsk, in the middle of the Barents Sea. But because this part of the world is so heavily burdened by snow the entire year, researchers lost track of the base. It was only this August of 2021 when temperatures soared that the wartime weather station revealed itself once more from the melting ice. Team leader Evgeny Armalov, a senior researcher with the Russian Arctic National Park, which now administers the island, said in a statement, "This summer in the Arctic was very warm, so the entire area of Schatzgraber was completely free of snow and ice, which made it possible to fully explore the area." Archaeologists found all kinds of artifacts here, from German army uniforms to rusty old weapons and unused boxes of ammunition. They also found landmines, hand grenades, and the crumbling remains of gun batteries once used to defend the shores of the island. After the war was over, the Soviet military actually moved in and built their own base over the top of what the Nazis built, using the abandoned shelters for themselves. Number 3. Abandoned English Village. There is a creepy, forgotten village in England that was abandoned during World War II and has never been reoccupied. It's the ghost village of Tinham, located in Dorset. The tiny settlement had to be evacuated in 1943 so that Allied soldiers had more room for practicing their surprise assault on D-Day. But what's really crazy is that after everyone was told to pick up and leave their homes, the government never let them return. To this very day, the village remains property of the military. In fact, the whole area turned into the personal property of the British Ministry of Defense. There's a firing range here in the seemingly quiet countryside. And as for the village, it's technically off limits. But thanks to the internet, more and more people are learning about the creepy abandoned village and sneaking inside to take pictures. Perhaps the creepiest part of the village is that when the residents left, somebody pinned a note to the door of the local church asking that the military respect their homes and buildings. This was because they fully expected to return to their homes, but alas, they never did. Number 2. Japanese Gunner Complex. On June 29, 1945, the Americans launched a raid on the Sasebo Naval District of Spain on the island of Kyushu. Japanese defenders fired at least 600 artillery rounds from 13 separate air defense posts. 4 American aircraft were taken out, but there was nothing they could do to prevent the attack. The base suffered serious damage, all of it except for the sprawling underground complex beneath it. After the Japanese surrendered several months later, the Americans seized the base. They found the undamaged complex underneath the main base with tunnels stretching across the entire city. Not knowing what to do, the Americans decided the only way to properly disarm the facility was to burn it down. But after they burnt it, they just kind of left it alone. The base was forgotten about, never used again, and ultimately abandoned. Only in recent years did the Japanese turn this place into a historical site. The tunnels are still there, just burned and black from the damage the Americans did. Plus, they're creepy, dark, and probably full of ghosts. Would you explore a place like this? Let us know in the comments down below. Number 1. Abandoned Munitions Factory. There's an abandoned munitions factory from World War II in the middle of the Polish forest. It's probably one of the creepiest places you could possibly come across in the middle of the woods. The facility was absolutely monumental during its dates of operation between 1939 and the end of the war. It had its very own casino, a fire brigade, a railway network, and comfortable living quarters for the German officers. There also happened to be a concentration camp here where prisoners were forced to do all the actual work for making the munitions. They had about 25,000 prisoners here working at the Gross-Rosen camp, all the way up until the Red Army finally arrived and liberated Poland in 1945. Right before the Russians showed up, the Germans managed to evacuate most of the valuable equipment. The rest of the equipment was dismantled by the Russians and taken back east. Today, all that remains are the ruins of the factory, traces of the roads once driven by the German officers, and even the old concrete foundations of a sewage treatment plant overgrown with trees and weeds. Number 8. Iron Rain. A planet where it rains iron? Sounds like something from a sci-fi movie. But it really exists. That is, according to data gathered about an exoplanet 640 light-years away. What's an exoplanet? It's a planet that isn't part of an established solar system. Kind of an outcast, we guess. But then, outcasts always make for more interesting subjects, and this exoplanet called WASP-76b certainly fits that bill. Where does the rain made of iron come in? It's tied up in the type of world WSAP-76b is, which is something known as tidally locked. That means it's basically like our moon. It takes a long time to rotate. In fact, it takes the same amount of time to rotate as it does to orbit a star. This results in a permanently bright side, lit by the star, and a dark side that never sees daylight. Because the day side features a lot of radiation, it's extremely hot. To give you an idea, scientists believe the temperature is 2,400 degrees Celsius, 4,352 degrees Fahrenheit. In short, you can't keep anything nice down there. And when it comes to elements such as metals, well, they don't stand a chance. It's so intensely hot that stuff like iron evaporates. What happens when iron evaporates? It turns into vapor. And there's a lot of wind on this exoplanet to blow stuff around. The combo of a hot side and a cool side produces some wild weather conditions. These become even wilder once the iron vapor reaches the planet's night side. Going from super hot to super cool, the vapor hardens where it falls like rain. You'd better take more than an umbrella to cope with that shower. Number 7. Seriously ancient material. What's the oldest stuff you can find on Earth? Would it surprise you to learn that the answer is dust? Yep, and not just any old dust. This is a very cool form of stardust that comes from deep space and landed on our planet in the shape of a meteorite. Itty-bitty specks from dying stars known as pre-solar grains traveled here on the surface of space rocks. Luckily for scientists, a prime example of this landed in Australia back in 1969. The Murchison meteorite, named after the place where it landed, made quite an impact in more ways than one. For starters, it weighed 220 pounds, 100 kilograms. Quite an impressive object, though at the time a lot of people didn't know what they were looking at. In fact, in an amusing case of country folk taking things in their stride, A dairy farmer reportedly saw a lump of what he thought was charcoal on his property. He simply picked it up and threw it away. Once he realized it might be something special, he took a sample to the press. Geology students then got involved and naturally wanted to investigate the farmer's charcoal for themselves. One little problem, it had wound up in the manure. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it, right? Flash forward to 2020 and scientists are studying the pre-solar grains found on what we now call the Murchison meteorite. To their amazement, the grains are between 4 million and 3 billion years older than the Sun. And that's a relatively young 4.6 billion years old in the first place. This super ancient material was probably on Earth at one point, having been in the mix when the planet was being formed. Unfortunately, the grains have long since gone. So this is a great find and evidence of our galaxy's fascinating cosmic history. Number 6. Baby Tyrannosaurs. Tyrannosaurs are easily one of the most fearsome creatures Earth has ever seen, and luckily they're long gone. Well, unless that whole Jurassic Park thing we've been hearing about manages to get up and running. In the meantime, we can get a taste of what a real-life T-Rex might look like courtesy of these embryonic fossils, which were found in 1983 and 2017 respectively. These unique discoveries were only examined in depth in 2020, and the results are incredible. The 1983 example is a jawbone in Montana belonging to a baby T-Rex, with the other fossil being a toe claw in Alberta. One detail that came from the research is that a little tyrannosaur had a skull which was comparable in size to a mouse. When it came to the jawbone, it was very much stuck in the rock, and we guess people were afraid of breaking it whilst trying to get it out. Today's experts can now check it out without damaging it by using a particle accelerator. Another interesting detail was the Tyrannosaur's chin, which is particular to the ferocious and world-famous carnivore. As for where they came from, evidence points to a time period of 70 to 75 million years ago, or late Cretaceous period. Scientists were stunned by the findings, which show that while fossils may be static lumps of ancient rock, they're packed with information that really brings our planet's history to life. Just when you think you've seen everything about a T-Rex, something else comes along and knocks your socks off. Or bites your head off, which seems more appropriate for a T-Rex. Number 5. Radio from space. The business of sending radio waves into space is long established. Beginning in the 1970s, we sent signals into the cosmos, hoping someone or something might pick it up and drop by for a visit. Well, did you know that we've been receiving radio waves back? Since 2007, experts have been aware of a phenomenon called FRBs, or fast radio bursts. These powerful energy releases are being studied as we speak. But a strange development has led to the sense of mystery around these bursts deepening. You see, initially, the thinking was that FRBs came from magnetars, or stars which lived fast and died young. In that sense, FRBs sound a little rock and roll. However, at the start of 2020, a repeating series of bursts was picked up from an area near a spiral galaxy dubbed M81. Situated 11.7 million light-years away, the bursts have been identified as coming from a group of stars. These are unflatteringly called a globular cluster. What's fascinating about this is that the cluster is very old, meaning that more than just hot young magnetars are capable of producing FRBs. Now we know the kind of places they come from. All we've got to do is work out what they are in the first place. What do you think these messages mean? What are the aliens saying to us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 4. Huge coral reef. Coral reefs are a well-known feature of the ocean. However, it's rare that a coral reef will stagger people with its sheer size. How big can a coral reef get? Keep watching to find out. Oh, and by the way, if you suffer from vertigo, you might want to look away now. Researchers have discovered a new reef that is as tall as a skyscraper. This awe-inspiring reef, shaped like a blade, was found in 2020 by a team who were busy mapping the northern Great Barrier Reef in Australia. They'd realized they discovered something that doesn't come along every day. As the publicity notes, this is the first such sighting of an epic reef in well over a century. The reef stretches up to a mind-boggling height of 500 meters, 1,640 feet. The base of it alone measures 4,921 feet, 1.5 kilometers. It's so high that you don't have to dive down deep to find it. The end is visible some 131 feet, 40 meters down from the surface. It's referred to as a detached reef. What's that? Well, these coral creations can be part of the Great Barrier Reef itself, forming part of an enormous whole. This example is very much its own chunk of coral. It's comparable to the height of the Empire State Building. The reef is taller, by the way, just so you know. The Empire State is like a baby brother to this thing. Number 3. Vanishing Star. Stars are actually pretty massive despite them looking so small from way down here on Earth. So when one seems to disappear, it opens up all kinds of interesting questions about how our universe works. As far as sky watchers are aware, a star will go supernova when it dies. This is a lengthy and spectacular process, a transformation that turns a living star into a black hole or a neutron star. In the case of one big blue star, however, it didn't behave as it was supposed to. A blue variable star, so named because, well, it's variable in its behavior, suddenly ceased to exist in a dwarf galaxy. What's a dwarf galaxy? It's a small pocket of stars and such, and by small we mean in relative terms. Some dwarf galaxies can contain a few billion stars, so they're only small fry compared to the vastness of the universe. This blue variable star, located 75 million light-years away, was first spotted by astronomers in 2001. Then in 2019 it was discovered that the star wasn't there anymore. Where did it go? Analysis revealed the cosmic vanishing took place around 2011. So did this big ball of light just vamoose without saying goodbye? It would certainly seem like it. What happened? The theory is that the star died but didn't go supernova for some reason. This would make it unique and something of a mystery. Did it decide to skip to the black hole phase without putting on a light show for the world's telescopes? Possibly. Though there is another potential explanation, and this one's a bit more simple. The blue variable star may still be in place, just obscured by dust and gas. Maybe those stargazers should check again in a few years. If it's still missing, then everything people know about stars could be going out the window. Number 2. Antarctica Rainforest. With its icy vastness and rampaging polar bears, you'd be forgiven for believing that Antarctica was just always freezing and covered in snow. Well, actually, that's not the case. In fact, a long time ago, a rainforest is known to have been part of the landscape there before the area went into an epic cold snap. The forest was there 90 million years ago, as in the Cretaceous period, and is believed to have been a hangout hotspot for dinosaurs. You wouldn't have thought such a thing were possible, yet it's true. And we know this because in 2017, some fossilized rainforest parts turned up at the bottom of the Amundsen Sea by West Antarctica. Scientists explored the samples and discovered evidence of plant life. Long before the Antarctica we know existed, a mild climate encouraged various creatures and other forms of life to flourish and develop. Another staggering feature of this story is the way the forest survived in spite of the position on the globe. As we know, the area spends extended periods of time without sunlight. So what were these plants using to sustain themselves? Did the animals migrate and come back? Or did they find some other way to keep going? It's a fascinating scenario, one whose true answer may never be known without the help of a time machine. Number 1. Mars Spaceship. In 2015, reports came in of a spacecraft being spotted on the surface of Mars. If you didn't hear about it, don't worry. This was more of a, how can you put this? Interpretation rather than a definite sighting. There's no definitive evidence of UFOs on the famous red planet. However, we are seeing Mars up close and personal like never before. The Curiosity rover is doing great work photographing this strange alien landscape. And along the way, as people study the results and their imaginations go wild, they start to see things. Some of these things may sound a little crazy. The spaceship is thought to measure around 10 feet, 3 meters. It was apparently a vehicle probably designed to hold up to 40 passengers. Hey, wait, that sounds a little cramped. Very cramped, in fact. But there's an explanation for that. Previous sightings have identified evidence of people who are just centimeters in height. So actually a so-called ship like this could have been very spacious for such small beings. Other strange sights on Mars include a huge crab and Barack Obama. Yes, it seems the Martians were keen to pay tribute to the former president of the United States. He's not making any comments. Experts draw attention to a condition known as pareidolia. This is when human beings process visual information and draw some interesting conclusions. A great example is an image of rocks on Mars that resemble a face, leading some to believe an ancient alien race, the same aliens that helped the ancient Egyptians build the pyramids, hailed from the Red Planet. Thanks for watching. Are there other crazy recent discoveries you think should have been included on the list? Let us know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you soon for another amazing video right here on American Eye.